Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Misunderstood. I'm Rachel Yucatel. So I love to bring you guys different topics, different guests, stories that may be of an ordinary person, but that has an extraordinary life, or something that you might not see in your everyday, feeds that you're looking at in social media. So today, my guest is Lara Love Hardin. She has written a book called The Many Lives of Mama Love. Okay, but here's why she's important and why you should be maybe picking up this book before today, which is when you're listening to it. But I had her on to discuss the book because the book was so good. But as of today, Oprah has agreed with me. She has picked The Many Lives of Mama Love as her 104th book recommendation in her book club. And what's interesting about this is not the first time she has picked one of Lara's books. So, Lara's a good writer. So this book is about her memoir, and it chronicles her life. She was, this like upscale woman who was married with a bunch of kids that all went to private school, but no one knew she was hiding a very serious addiction. She was stealing from her neighbors. She ends up going to prison, losing everything. And that's when her life turns around. And what happens is she ends up surviving behind bars. She starts ghostwriting for people in prison and comes out and is given a chance by one person who believed in her, did not, decided to overlook her past and did not value her based on the stigma of, the fact that she was incarcerated for doing something, terrible, and gave her a chance. And now she is a literary agent. She is a ghostwriter and she is an author. And what's interesting about that is that she has also collaborated with the Dalai Lama, the Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and others. So anyways, this story is compelling. It's exciting. It's so interesting. You're going to love to listen to it driving home, wherever you're listening to this podcast. But not only that, you're going to want to pick up this book. Again, it's called The Many Lives of Mama Love. I couldn't put it down. I can guarantee you won't either. So I'm excited for you to listen to my episode with Lara Love Hardin. Lara, thank you so much for joining me on Misunderstood. It's such an honor to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk with you.
So I'm so excited to let people know about your book and basically about your life, because it's such an important story, I would say, such an emotional story. And you are an example of why I have this podcast. So my podcast is about people who have been reduced to a single headline and are on a mission to change their narrative, and how important that is, how important, exploring the complexities of how people are portrayed and of human nature, and like celebrating second chances. So I think your story encapsulates all of that. And I'm really excited for my listeners to hear all about you. Before we get into like the meat of like where this all comes from, I just want to talk about your childhood, because you didn't have the easiest of childhoods. Can you talk a little bit about that?
It's funny because I get asked a lot, because I condensed my childhood into a few paragraphs in the book, and I've gotten some feedback on that, as you get. And I really wanted to make sure I wasn't blaming my life choices on my childhood. But, over the years, as we learn about childhood trauma and how it affects us later, I think that played a big part. But I grew up in a family that was chaotic and violent, and a lot of it I've blocked out and kind of learned about later as an adult, way later, where I had to be sort of a detective in my own life to get the stories. And my response to that as a child was just to throw myself into school. I just wanted to be at school. I just wanted to get attention for my grades. But I grew up in a family that never talked about emotions. Like, there was zero language for emotions. And I would say it was marked mostly by just the sense that I was always alone and that I was safer alone. Which helped when I was younger, but growing up as an adult, that's not always the best coping strategy. But my big escape from an early age was just books and reading. And that's where I kind of, I think that's how I became a writer, is I read so much, but it wasn't it was a trauma response, my initial reading and escape into books.
Did you have a favorite book or a favorite kind of book?
Oh, I loved all the books. I read everything, and I started writing when I was really young, really bad poetry and things like that, like you do in junior high. But I read anything I could get my hands on, and everything from, I read in first grade, I read Gone with the Wind. It's like 1,100-page
Wow.
book twice, like it was just, to me, there was, the first line of my book is reading was my first addiction. And that's really what it was. And it was just sort of this desperate escape from my environment into these other worlds and learning about other people and other families and other stories.
Yeah, I was going to ask if the obsession with it was because you loved the stories and it got you out of your own, or if you liked how the words looked on paper and how they made sense. Like, sometimes people are obsessed with true crime, but some people are obsessed with romance novels because they're aching for that in their own life.
Yeah. I mean, not romance when I was younger, like elementary school. I read a lot of stories I grew up in Massachusetts. So I remember reading a lot of stories about girls my age in California, like that was the promised land. But it was really just anybody's story but my own. And
Right.
in books make sense, right? People's motivations are clear. There's like an arc, there's happy endings. And so that's really what I kind of clung to.
And you, at a young age, learned about grief and loss and addiction very early. You lost both your only siblings to drug addiction and to a car accident based
Yeah.
on alcoholism, correct?
Yeah. Yes. My sister died. I was a teenager. She became a severe alcoholic as a teenager. And again, it was sort of just a point of shame and embarrassment. There was no discussion. Um, and, I knew there was chaos around me. My brothers were violent and, would do crazy things. My sister would get brought home by the police. And again, I would just be like hiding in my room reading.
Mm.
And because no one talked about those things, and again, this was, in the 80s. So there was not language about mental health or addiction or alcoholism or recovery. It was just sort of silence and chaos.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, when I was 15, my father died of a cocaine overdose. He was 44. And that was, as a teenager, very traumatic to lose someone that you're close to like that. But also, as you go on later in life, to understand how an addiction like that can kill someone and how devastating that is when a life is cut short, but how it affects you as the one that remains alive, right? There's so
Right.
much that goes on. But you weren't involved in drugs as a teen, were you? It sounded like from your book, it started later in your life.
Yeah, I was a late bloomer and an overachiever all at the same time
Mm.
in that area. No, I really thought I could, my role in the family was to be the good one, right? Like that was my role. And the way that manifested was just like I was very good at school and I threw all my attention into getting good grades and playing sports and winning awards and, glomming onto other people's families and inserting myself into their lives. And, when my sister died, it was the first experience I had with death. And I
Mm.
couldn't really understand like how, and probably you can relate. It's like someone is there and then they're gone and life
Yeah.
goes on. Like I couldn't comprehend it in my own internal world and I internalized everything. And my family, just to give you like, this is a perfect example of the family I grew up in. They never mentioned her name again. There was
Wow.
no rituals around grief. It was just, and anytime, even as an adult, because I've learned the language of emotions as an adult, when I tried to talk to my mom about my sister, she would just burst into tears, which effectively shuts down the conversation. So that was like
Sure.
a really hard thing to go through. And I just actually lost my father in the beginning of January, and it was like really interesting when you think how you've healed and changed. It's only when things happen that you see it. And I was like, oh, we're talking about it. I'm expressing grief. I'm reaching out to people. I'm being messy and it's okay. And it was such a different, so easy to see the arc of things looking back.
Yeah. I'm very sorry for your
Thank
loss.
you.
February is the month of love. And if you've listened to the podcast before, you know how in love I am with today's sponsor, OneSkin. Most skincare routines only deliver superficial results, but with OneSkin, you get a scientifically proven treatment that improves the appearance and health of your skin at the cellular level. What's their secret? OneSkin's proprietary OS01 peptide. It's the first ingredient scientifically proven to reduce the buildup of cells that contribute to skin aging, which means with OneSkin, you are left with healthier, younger looking skin with fewer lines and wrinkles, reduced age spots, and a stronger natural barrier, which is especially important this time of year. Your skin does so much for you. Return the favor with OneSkin. Believe me, you will not be sorry. For a limited time, our listeners will get an exclusive 15% off their first OneSkin purchase using the code UNDERSTOOD when you check out at oneskin.co. That's oneskin.co. Invest in health and longevity with your skin with OneSkin. So I've been using this now for 2 months. I'm not kidding when I tell you how many people have DM'd me that have used the code and that have gotten products saying that they absolutely love everything about it. I love everything about it. I now use the body lotion. I use the eye cream. I use the face cream. I actually now use the tinted moisturizer for the sun. I think it's SPF 30. I gave for Christmas, I actually gifted my 78-year-old mother the product. It was the travel pouch, and she uses all the product, even the face wash. I use the face wash too, actually. And she keeps asking how she can get more. So people are loving this. I'm not kidding when I say I get an overwhelming amount of DMs on this product in particular, that people absolutely love it. You have to try it, you guys. OneSkin is more than skincare. It's about skin longevity, targeting the root causes of aging to help you look and feel your best at every age. Get started today with 15% off using code UNDERSTOOD at oneskin.co. That's 15% off oneskin.co, oneskin.co with code UNDERSTOOD. After you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. It's time to expect more from your skincare routine. Invest in the health of your skin with OneSkin. Okay, so your story seems like it should be made for TV. It's really crazy. So you somehow get yourself you're married, you have 4 kids. Tell me about that suburban cul-de-sac life that you were living there.
Yeah. Well, where my addiction started, so I've been married now 3 times, which kind of makes me an expert, but not. So when I moved as far away from home as I could to go to college, to go to graduate school, to get a master's degree in creative writing, I was just trying to outrun my past and my family and myself, really. And so I got married. I had 3 boys in 4.5 years straight out of graduate school.
Wow.
And I really wanted to create this family that I didn't have growing up. This family that I imagined everybody else in the world had. I imagined everyone else had a normal family. And so that's really when my addiction started. That marriage was falling apart. He was cheating on me. I was trying to pretend everything was okay when it wasn't. And, back then, this is the 90s now, opiates were passed out as sample packs everywhere you went. Like, you have an earache, here's a Vicodin. You've had a child, here's a bunch, And so I took one. I think I was medicating depression, but again, there's no way I would ever ask for help or say, I think I'm not okay. And the way it reacted in my brain was it lit it up, right? I felt smarter, happier. I could pretend everything was okay easier. And as that marriage was falling apart, I would take 2 to feel the same way, and 3. And, that went on and off for a good decade where I knew oh, this is a little bit of a problem. I was a single mom for 10 years. By the end of it, I was taking 60 a day.
Wow.
20, 20 for breakfast, 20 for lunch, 20 for dinner, basically. And that is the nature of addiction. I mean, obviously that would kill someone now and me.
And you could take that much because your tolerance had built up. I mean, you weren't laid out. You were still on
No. I could be fully functioning.
Yeah.
And I thought I needed that to feel joy, to get through my day. And it was on and off. It wasn't straight through. I knew I tried to quit a million times, but I remarried, had my 4th son. We were both I had 6 years not taking any drugs. I was feeling great, bought a house and a business. And ended up, my husband started smoking heroin, and I ended up trying it for a whole bunch of reasons that mostly I just hadn't done the inner work that I needed to do. And that's when everything fell apart in 11 months from the time I tried that. The thing I swore I would never do. That's why my brother died from a heroin overdose.
Right.
And
Right.
I said,
Wow.
never in a million years. And all of that running from my own trauma and lack of coping and internalizing everything and inability to ask for help and this sort of drive to pretend that I had it all together. And, I was the perfect cul-de-sac soccer mom and I was in the perfect marriage, and none of it was true. Um, and that catches up to you, I think. And so those 11 months, the money was gone. I started committing crimes to buy food and gas and groceries and keep up the pretense of the lifestyle because all the money was going to drugs.
But like, let's paint a picture for people that you do so well in your book. I mean, your kids were going to private school. You were, fully invested in their lives. You were living in a nice house. The next thing you know, you're trying to go to a hotel because your lights are about to be turned off. Can you like kind of get us into the mindset of how you got there and where we got to where you were actually arrested?
Yeah. So over those 11 months of the heroin smoking, um, everything started to fall apart. But again, I had 6 kids in private school, Montessori school, and I had 2 stepchildren at that time. So I had my 4 boys and 2 stepchildren. So we were a blended family. Um, I owned a really successful business, and everything just started, unraveling. And I wanted to then when you're in that sort of compulsive nature and obsessive nature of addiction, like I knew right from wrong. I knew I wanted to stop, but you're so in that compulsion that it was always like, I'll figure it out tomorrow, right? Like
Mm.
tomorrow I'll get it together. I just need to like do a little more to feel okay, and then I can change my whole life. And I knew I this is not how I wanted to live. And the irony is that I thought there's no way I can tell anyone I need help because I could never be 30 days. I couldn't go away to rehab for 30 days and be separated from my children.
Mm,
The
mhm.
end result of the world kind of closing in on me and me being in this, the power's out. Um, the law enforcement's closing in because I was stealing, my friends' credit cards and using it at the grocery store, my neighbors' checks. Um, the end result was the police pounding on the door and coming in and arresting me. And the only one home at the time was my son, Caden, who was almost about to turn 4. My older boys were all in school, and my stepchildren were in school.
Mm.
And that was really the beginning of the end and the beginning of the beginning for me, the person I am
Yeah.
now in that moment.
And at that point, no one had really tried to do an intervention with you that was a friend of yours. I mean, the first time someone stepped in was the police, right?
Yeah, I did have a friend who came over. When you're hiding this secret, you just I made up elaborate lies that I thought were genius,
Of
and
course.
I had, and they make no sense now looking back. But I had a friend come over, and I'd gotten very thin, um, and she was a little concerned. I just had a friend recently who was like, "I didn't know you were on drugs. I thought maybe had like a terminal disease or something, and I thought I looked great, and but she came over and she said, how are you? Why are you so thin? I'm really worried about you. And my elaborate lie was because books are my thing. I was like, well, I read this book called The Secret,
Mm.
and I manifested myself skinny. I thought it was a genius lie. And she was like, you know, but there's really nothing you can do for anyone if they don't
Want to be helped.
help. Like I wanted to be helped, but I couldn't admit that did not have my shit together, if I can say that. Um,
Right. And had anybody caught you? Because I know you said you stole from your neighbors, your friends. Had anyone said, wait a minute, where's my money? Had anyone accused you of anything?
Yeah, my closest neighbors, I was again, I was having mail sent to their house, and I would take their mail. Like, none of it made sense, but it was all closing in, and they knew, and I knew that they knew, and so that was all kind of the chaos at the end. And my ex-husband had been keeping my older boys. He was like, "You're not okay," and I'm going to have them come to our house. So everything was falling apart in all of the
Right.
areas. Yeah.
So your youngest son who was there gets picked up by Child Protective Services. I was always curious. Did he end up staying with them? Did he get to go with your ex-husband? What happened? Because your current husband at the time was also arrested, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We became co-defendants, which is when
Oh,
the
wow.
romance is over for sure. So, I was, when the police were in the house and I was handcuffed and I was begging them to let me call someone to pick up my son, and they wouldn't do that. And so they called Child Protective Services. And, despite the chaos I'm describing, he'd never spent a night away from me. He was, at that age where they're just very attached and stranger danger. And he's scared and crying. And I have my hands handcuffed behind my back, so I can't comfort him. I can only tell him, like, these strangers about to drive you away are friends. And it was just such a traumatic moment for both of us. And so he went into foster, Child Protective Services put him into emergency foster care. And then luckily my ex-husband and his wife were able to get certified. And for the year that I was incarcerated, we're able to take care of him. Thankfully, great. I was so grateful for that. And so he was with his brothers, which made it better. But I did also, 80% of women in jail are mothers with minor children, and that sometimes the time that CPS court gives you to meet all the requirements to get your child back and the time of your sentence do not coincide. And that is a
Right.
big issue. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about life in prison for a minute. You were there for how long in total?
I was there, I was sentenced to a year. And so it was 10 months, which is, I got time off for good behavior.
Okay. And you really made the most of it because I feel like this is where your life sort of blossoms or at least begins to show you some signs that maybe you hadn't seen before. What would you say it was for you, what that time was?
I think, initially it was horrible, and overall it was horrible. Like, I don't recommend it, but it was great for me. And some of us learn things the hard way, right? But it was interesting to find myself in a place where I'm stripped of every single piece of my identity that made up who I was. I had this carefully constructed identity to the outside world, but I was no longer a mother in there. I was no longer a wife. I was no longer a boss or a worker. I wasn't a community member. I wasn't a neighbor. I wasn't a friend. I was alone and just a number. And that was terrifying. And it forced me to rebuild myself into who I really was, from the core out. And and that didn't happen right away. I was terrified at first. I couldn't stop my thoughts. I just spent hours rewriting every mistake, replaying every mistake I had done in my whole life. Like, why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do this? And all my fear for the future. And there was one book in there. There's not a lot to read in jail. And there was one book, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And there was one line in that book that one sentence of how to stop your thoughts.
Hmm.
And it's simple. You just think in your head, I wonder what my next thought will be. And when you do that, your brain just shuts off. It's just like this magic trick. And so I learned to meditate in jail. Again, easier ways to do that.
Mhm.
But was able to take that little gap, that little like millisecond of freedom in my mind and just make it longer and longer. And I think that really saved me. Again, books were saving me.
Wow. And so you had some education before in writing, and you at this point had figured out that writing was your love. But while you were in your addiction, you were not doing any writing, correct?
Correct. I cannot, writing as a child and growing up was how I processed the world and how I processed my feelings and made meaning and made sense of things. When I was in my addiction and taking opiates, I never wrote. I stopped writing. And I had a master's degree in creative writing. I stopped writing, but I started writing again in jail because I was, I didn't have drugs in my system. And I started ghostwriting in jail, which is like writing letters for the other women as them to judges. And, I broke up with some boyfriends for them. I seduced some people for them. I got letters so they could go to treatment instead of prison. And I started, I started sort of honing those skills, not knowing that that's something I was going to do later in life.
Right. So you get out of jail for good behavior, and walk us through what happens. How does your addiction feel when you walk out of jail?
Um, when I walked out of jail, I was under the belief that I had because I'm a rule follower despite all the felonies, right? So I followed the rules in jail. I'm on probation. I think, okay, I'm just going to have to do the things to rebuild my life. I was fighting against this clock to get my son back, right? To
Mm,
reunify with Caden. Um, and, when I was in jail, I would see women go out and then we'd have a goodbye party. They were full of good intentions, like I'm going to reconnect with my family or go back to school or never do drugs again. And then they'd be rearrested a week later. And I was like, that's crazy. That's so stupid. Why would you do that? I'm never coming back. But what I didn't realize, all the obstacles that would be put in front of me that have nothing to do with drugs or committing a crime, and how easy it would be to go back to jail. It's impossible to get a job. How do you rent a house
right.
with a criminal record? There's all of these obstacles. You're having to be in different places to drug test, for probation. So there were so many hurdles and obstacles that I had no idea about in the system, and bureaucracy and logic. But then there was all of the stigma and shame that I
Mm,
felt.
mhm,
When I was sentenced, I had that headline. My face was on the front page of the paper, and it said, calling me the neighbor from hell.
mm.
While I was incarcerated, someone anonymously mailed me all of the online comments to that article. Strangers saying horrible things about me, and she should be in prison for life. We could get, all of these things. And again, I read them over and over again, and I carried them around for years. And so I'd internalized all of this shame, and I felt regret and remorse and guilt for the people I hurt, my community, my neighbors who I actually loved, and all the collateral damage of my addiction.
Mm.
Um, but the shame was so sticky, and the judgment was so harsh, and I felt very much alone and isolated, and that's a hard place to be in for people.
Had anyone been contacting you while you were in prison that whole time that still forgave you, that wanted to be your friend, that understood that you were not that person that had done these things? Or were you really alone when you got out?
I was really alone.
Yeah. And that's a
Yeah.
hard place to be.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting because I've heard you talk about, you think doing the time in prison is doing the time. And then when you get out, you will have done your time, you'll have paid your dues, and then you'll be able to live an easier life after. But you did not feel that way. I know I've interviewed a lot of people actually that have been in jail, even wrongly accused for something, and have been let out, and they are exonerated, and they have the hardest time getting out of prison because there aren't very many options, and that stigma doesn't go away. And something you just said that really shook me for a second is that the stigma and the shame associated with something you've done is really terrible. I mean, when you go to sleep at night, this is what you hear in your head in the darkness of night on your pillow, and that never goes away unless you feel like you've done your time. And for me, something happened in my past that I had to deal with a lot of shame and regret and remorse and, vitriol from a lot of people coming at me, what they thought of me. And I used to say for many years, it's not like I murdered someone, but the hate that people have is so terrible. And I wish I was able to go to prison for something and do my time and get out of it to let people know I've done my time and it's over. Now you can forgive me. And I don't have that. It was a very weird
Mhm.
thing. But listening to you, it's very interesting because even when you've done your time, people still look at you a certain way. So, how did you move to that next point where you felt like that was that someone was giving you a chance? I know you finally, filled out a Craigslist application, something from Craigslist that you read, and you met that person that actually believed in you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting that it's really hard. I think only by kind of owning your story and healing your own shame do you escape that, because people are never gonna there's always gonna be people who want you to pay
Mm,
forever, for anything. But I answered, it was about 2 years post jail, and I was living in a 400 square foot apartment. I'd gotten my son back, desperately trying to rebuild my life and just coming up with these obstacles, and ways in which I thought, like, I there were times when I was like, I would feel safer in jail, which was like a mind-boggling thing to feel.
Yeah.
But I answered a Craigslist ad for a part-time assistant at a literary agency.
Mhm.
And, I didn't know if I was gonna be murdered. It seemed like a very weird ad, and it was very extensive, all these questions for a 5 to 10 hour a week. And I
But just
met
on as a sidebar, you felt confident in that ability that you were like, "Oh, I could try out for this because I'm a good writer." You felt confident about something, right?
Yeah, I felt, one, I'm a great assistant. Two, I have, a background in writing and reading and literature, before jail. The problem is often like before that thing that you do that the world doesn't like you for, everything good you've done before that doesn't count, right?
Yeah.
It is just that thing there.
Yeah.
So I answered the ad, and so I got the job working for a literary agency. And the man didn't ask me about my background. I had like a don't ask, don't tell policy. Like, if you ask me, I will tell you, but I'm not going to volunteer it
Yeah.
because of that quick judgment that people have. So I started working for a literary agency, as a part-time assistant. And I was there for 12 years. So when I ended, I was CEO. So that's a whole 12-year gap in there. But, it was amazing because I was working in the world of books and nonfiction books and with amazing authors. We were Archbishop Desmond Tutu's literary agency. And so I was, the person who hired me quickly realized that I was able to write. And so I started collaborative writing on a lot of the books that we were representing through that agency, and working with these amazing authors and world leaders and spiritual leaders and very non-judgy people and scientists and Stanford professors. But the whole time for a decade, I was keeping my secret. Now, the person who hired me found out Googled me a few weeks after he had hired me, and freaked out and sent me home for the day to think about it. Because, it's not the first thing that people are going to think of when they meet me, right? Because we all have our biases, or who are people in jail, or who people who are
They
criminals.
look like or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, and so he sent me home, and I think that was like the hard. He said, "Come back tomorrow. Let me think about this." I never called any references. Like, he was just kind of realizing. But he had also just
Oh,
called.
wait, maybe I made a mistake in trusting
Yeah,
him.
and he had just called me brilliant a few days before. So like I left there and I was like, I'm never going back. Like, I was mortified, like my dream job is over. Because I was desperate to prove I was valuable and worthy again.
Mm.
And I was like, I can't go back there. Like, I couldn't face him, but I did go back and I said, I'm really sorry I put you in this position. And I hope you know that I didn't lie to you. And I'm just as brilliant today as I was yesterday before you found this out. And he said that he needs to walk his talk, right? And so he gave me the job. I kept the job. And, I find that like people who have lost everything or have been at rock bottom, like everyone I know has been in that place. They will rise to the level in which someone believes in them every single time, and because I was so desperate to prove I was good, more good than bad, and that I was worthy and I could contribute value to the world. I worked really, really hard for a long time to prove that, and but I was keeping a secret the whole time.
Right. And at this point, did you have your children back? Were you dating? Were you getting remarried? Where were you personally?
I had Cade and I had gotten back and kind of out of the system. My oldest son, he was a senior in high school when I was arrested, so he was off at college. I had my older boys in my life every day. It took me a long time to get out of a 400 square foot place so that I could have a place for them to be there. I mean, all of us would stay there, but they're huge boys. And that was a source of shame too. It was like, oh, it's going to take me so long to have this home for all my children, that I took for granted before I was arrested, right? Like those sort of everyday things. But so yeah, they were in my lives. It's hard to date when you're keeping a secret, and like I'm all the red flags in dating at that time. Like one, I've been married twice. I have 4 children. I'm on probation. I can't leave the county, so there's no romantic weekend. I have, I've been convicted of 32 felonies. Like, I wasn't like,
Oh my God.
you know, um, but I would have dated me. I was great. But yeah, so I wasn't. But the thing is I was so in so much shame that I was just like not in a. I was just kind of hiding from the world. Um,
Yeah.
I did meet someone in that time, and he said to me, I know who you are now. I would never Google. I lived in fear of anyone Googling me. Like, I don't, he knew the story, but he's like, I would never Google you. Like, I care about who you are today. Um, and, slowly over time, I started getting a community of people and friends in my life that I could um, tell my secret to. And that was
Right.
what ultimately is super healing.
Right. And you knew at that point because they knew you and trusted you that they wouldn't walk away. But I know that shame and I know that fear that people are going to Google you and say, oh, I don't want any part of this.
Yeah.
Or, or they just associate with you with that one choice or, group of choices, and think that you're never going to change. And something I wanted to go back to for a second is that when you were arrested, you actually tried to kill yourself because you thought that it was over. And you're mentioning now, which reminded me about it, about and being in this 400 square foot apartment, how uphill of a battle you felt like you had. And in prison, you were at the point where you were like, I'm never getting out of this. I'm never seeing my kids again. I can't do this time. I can't get over this addiction. And then here you are now. For people that are struggling or have been in that place, like, can you just talk about that? Because I think it's so important for people to know you just have to make it to the next day. You just got to take that
Yeah.
step forward,
Yeah.
especially when you feel like everyone's given up on you. I mean, that's just the
Yeah.
worst.
And really the thing that happened is when I was arrested and I was brought into the jail, I was crying the whole time, like, where have you guys taken my son? Is he okay? What's gonna happen
Mhm.
to him? Where is he? And the sheriff's deputy, when he's bringing me into the jail, the county jail, he stopped kind of in between in the hallway between 2 doors, and he said to me, you should not be anyone's mother. You will never see your son again. And
Mm.
I believed him. I believed both of those things to be true in that moment. And that's really what led me a few nights later, where I was like, I have just failed at life. Like, I've imploded my life. There is no redemption arc. There is no second chance. And I don't deserve one.
Mm.
And, it was the darkest place I'd ever been in. And, like, luckily through, some divine or whatever intervention, something miraculous, I didn't end up killing myself and I was never in that dark place again. I found out my son was where he was. And, I still didn't believe that I had much of a spark to get through every day. And I didn't know what was going to happen in the future. I didn't know if I was going to go to prison and never see my children till they were, in their 30s or something, like, I didn't know. Um, but sometimes in that place, like, if I know I'm not going to end my life, right? So I'm going to like be taking these steps. Sometimes all I could do is like look forward to looking back on this. That was my first thing. Like,
Yeah.
it's not even I'm going to get to the other side because that sounds like a lot of work too, or even like through the next minute. But it was like I can look forward to someday looking back on this from wherever I am there, and that's kind of like what I had to do, and then just like kind of take it day by day, step by step, like both in jail and when I got out of jail. And I have a strong drive and a strong work ethic, and I really was just like, um I'm going to succeed. Like,
Yeah.
I was like, I will rebuild my life and and get my children back. And I thought I would do it alone, but over time, more people that came into my life to do it with me, and that was, you know, ultimately going to jail made me a better mother, certainly a better writer, a better human. It made me develop my empathy and my compassion. Um, and then I got to work with all these amazing authors, and you just absorb things from them. And so Yeah, it was a long journey. I wish, I hadn't wasted 10 years in shame because I wasn't present for a lot of amazing things that
Mhm.
were happening in my work or experiences I was having. And, it's like you're not completely present if you're doing drugs, but you're also not completely present if you're in shame and afraid, not letting people close to you or just like kind of keeping this wall up. And that's how I was for a really long time.
Right. Or if you don't believe in your own worth and you just hide
Yeah.
yourself. I mean, what's interesting about you is you never, I don't see you as someone who ever struggled with finding their purpose, which a lot of people struggle with that. Finding purpose is terribly hard for someone who's lost and doesn't know what they're good at and doesn't know what makes them happy. But you obviously could find your purpose, but for you, it sounds like it was really hard to trust or find worth in yourself, and then finding that one person that believed in you regardless of if you begged them to or not. And
Right.
you very much, that's a turning point in your story. And it's something that really shows how important it is to have support. Some people get it unconditionally from their parents, some people have it from friends or a spouse, but some people don't have it. I didn't grow up with a family that gave it to me. I've had a very hard time trusting anyone is in my life for the right reasons and finding people that I can trust that will always be there no matter what. And it's kept me in a very recluse kind of state in my life. And it's only been recently that I found that I need to overcome my own issues with considering myself like a discount version of myself, really, and
Mhm.
moving forward. Um, can we talk about some of the fun things though that you got to do? I mean, I know you
Yeah.
got to meet Oprah, you got to, do all these fun things. Give us a couple of your highlights that
Yeah.
you're proud of.
Yeah. Well, I think when I'm proud, I mean, I got to work on this book called The Book of Joy, as part of the TMI agency. And so I got to go to Dharamsala, India, and work on that book with Archbishop Desmond Tutu and His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I was on probation at the time. I wasn't sure they're going to let me in the country. I was just, and again, keeping that secret. But, I was in jail and then I was in the Dalai Lama's private residence because he invited us to join him on his meditation, like his morning meditation. And
Wow.
he's fixing my hair in a photo shoot. And so it's like these amazing things. And a book that I co-wrote with a man who was on death row, Anthony Ray Hinton, for 30 years as an innocent man, called The Sun Does Shine. Oprah picked his book as her book club pick. So I got to have lunch with Oprah. And, once those pictures got out, it's funny how all the people who didn't visit me in jail suddenly wanted to go to lunch.
Right.
There's a
All of a
little bit of
sudden are
that
like calling
too.
like they're old friends. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I was now Oprah good or Brian Stevenson good or Dalai Lama, like I was good adjacent, and part of
Right.
it was um but there were amazing experiences, like crazy things that I kind of imagined in that dark night in jail when I thought I had failed so much that my life was just over. And I think that is the thing is like, we never know what's possible. And and everything changes all the time,
Yeah.
good and
Yeah.
bad. And so, but it's hard when you're in that dark place or you're in survival mode. Post jail is just in survival mode, right?
Mm.
So it's how much creativity and wonder and awe and joy do you feel when you're trying to survive every day or pay the rent or get food or all the things.
Yeah. Yeah. Something I came across while doing research for you was your TED Talk, which, by the way, was unbelievable. And it really puts into perspective, people need to stop living in the feeling that they are the worst thing that they did. And that is still a part of them. I felt like that could have come out of my mouth. It was so important
Yeah.
to me. I loved how you had everybody sit for a second in the room quiet and think of the worst thing they did and imagine that was what they had to be Googled about,
Yeah.
and that resonates with me. And how hard it is to walk away from that shame though, because you feel like it's your identity,
Yeah.
because other people have created that identity for you, and how important it is to create your own narration of your own story and not live in the what happened. I thought it was genius. Anyone that hasn't watched it, you should definitely Google it and listen to it because it's
Thank
brilliant.
Thank you. Yeah, doing that. I wasn't going to do that. The woman who organized it had asked me for about 5 years,
Mhm.
TEDx, and I said no. And then she finally, a few days before that, came into my office and said, "I'm not leaving till you say yes." Stayed for almost 4 hours, and I said, "Okay, I'll do it." And part of me really wanted to because
Yeah.
I was tired of living in fear of people seeing that headline that I was a neighbor from hell. Like that was my big thing, that headline. And so the feeling of getting up there, trying to explain what shame felt like, which was that exercise, and saying, yes, this is a part of my story. It's not the whole story. This is like who I was in this season of my life. It is not who I am. It wasn't who I was before. It's not who I am after. And the feeling I felt after that was such a feeling of lightness and freedom. And it was better than any drug I've ever taken, that feeling.
Yeah. And it's so relatable. That's why I think it comes across so well. You know what I mean? That everyone can, you don't have to be famous or someone important or be extraordinary to have an extraordinary story to move on to. And everyone has done something that they feel shameful about. And that makes it okay to realize you can let that go, you know?
Yeah. And ultimately I found out, like, apart from maybe a couple, because I want to be honest, but in general, no one was judging me as much as I was judging myself. No one was as unforgiving of me as I was of myself. And no one was, all of those things. And so that was really the work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also, I think, I've heard you talk about this too. It's important. Some people try and wish away something that happened in their past. And, I think it's incredibly important to realize, but it happened and it's okay that it happened and it's got you on the road to where you are now. And so to wish it away doesn't make sense. It's more to embrace it, to tell that story, to tell what you learned from that story. And even, what it was like to go through it. It's, it's not glorifying it, but it allows you to move past it. And I think it's important to, to own it as part of who you were to got you to who you are.
Yeah. I think that is the thing, just own it and say, yeah, I went to jail. I used to be like, oh my God, I can't answer,
Right.
And just say that is something that happened to me. It is not me.
Yeah.
Something I did, and I made mistakes. I should have gone to jail, but I shouldn't have punished myself for so long afterwards.
Right. Where are you at with your addiction now?
So I am in March 18th of this year will be 15 years drug-free.
Wow.
Mhm.
Wow. And is it something that is always in the back of your mind, or it's something that is not in your everyday thoughts?
It's not in my everyday thoughts. And the reason, I think part of it is like addiction's a symptom, right? It was like, to me, it was a way to get something that I was looking for in life that wasn't drugs. It was like, I wanted connection. I wanted a way to express myself. I wanted to numb pain. And so really I have all these other ways of getting connected and feeling joy and externalizing my feelings instead of internalizing them. So it's just not a coping strategy for me. And also, like, there's no part of me that thinks things weren't bad enough for me.
Yeah. Right.
Also,
And what's your relationship like with your children now?
it is wonderful. My youngest is at UC San Diego, just started college there, and my two of my older boys are engaged, getting married this year, and just bought a house like 10 minutes from me, my oldest son. And so I talk to them and see them every day. I mean, they're except for Caden, who's in college, they're all three graduated from college, and they're 20s and 30. One's 30. And it's wonderful. They turned out amazing, compassionate, smart. I'm totally biased, but they're amazing humans, and I was at a book event once, and there was like the only man in the library audience, and he raised his hand with a question, and he said, how did you get your children to want to be with you again and love you again? And I was like, they never stopped loving me. They never didn't want to be with me. They wanted me to be better, healthier, and okay. And I did the work to do that. But it's just such an interesting, I mean, my boys are, I never wanted to be their college essay topic. No parent does, no mother does, but they turned out well. And they're like, my story is part of their resilience story. I wish it wasn't that, but that's what it is. I can't wish away the past, like you just said. So they're amazing humans, and I'm super proud of them. And, when I took Caden to college at UC San Diego, there was a moment because statistically, he was more likely, anyone who's in foster care for any period of time is more likely to go to jail or prison than college. So that is the statistics. And so, and he had a 4.0 GPA, and he got into UC San Diego, and I was there. My older boys were helping move him into the dorm, and there was a moment when I went to park the car, and I was by myself on his move-in day, and I just had this moment where I thought, wow, this could have gone so differently for both of us.
Yeah.
And I'm super proud of him, all my boys, but in that moment was the first time, even with all these, like I got some bestsellers on the walls and all the achievements. It was the first moment in 15 years where I was so proud of me.
Right. Right.
You know what I mean? I was like, oh, and I don't think we take enough time, like when we're trying to prove ourselves good, to celebrate the things we accomplish. I know I certainly never do.
Yeah. And it's so interesting what you just said, because I feel like life is a series of sliding doors. Like you make a choice and something could have gone a different way because you chose something else. It's like, choose your own adventure story.
Yeah.
I always read when I was little, but, and how life can turn out completely different just from different decisions, and always can turn out different based on your decisions. It's a never ending cycle with that.
Yeah.
What did your children think of your book?
I had them all read it before it went into production, where it was get harder to change things. Caden read it. It's about a year ago. And I was mostly nervous for him. He's a senior in high school, and he read it. He was in his room reading it, and I kept going in to check on him. Then he locked me out, and he's like, "We'll talk about it tomorrow. Let me read it." And he read the whole thing in 6 hours. And he came in the next morning to my office, and he said, "I'm ready to talk about it." And I said, "Okay." And he goes, "I didn't know any of that." Like he knew his year away, like he knew the story of it, and he has some memories of that, and obviously knew our life since. But I never had access to my mother's interior world growing up.
Right.
And this is, the book it's graphic in places. And he loved it. He's like, I couldn't stop reading. And I was like, good, and he's not a big reader. And then my oldest son read it, and I was worried most about him reading it too, because he's a very sort of analytical thinker, and he was a senior in high school when this happened. And he said, "Mom, I've always felt close to you, but now I feel even closer to you." So they're super supportive. They've come to book events with me. They're at book launch, and they think I'm kind of badass. So
I think you're cool. That's awesome.
they think I'm cool. Yeah. or their friends do. So that, bleeds onto them. So, but yeah, they're just been super supportive. And I think it helped them understand some of the decisions and bad choices I make a little better.
And what's your status? Were you ever able to find a love of your life?
Well, I did get remarried for a third time, and that is not the love of my life. We've actually just split up this year. No, 2024 is coming hot, but I'll just say it. I think I've grown and I grew and changed so much in 13 years, and sometimes, there's no bad whatever, but I think I just changed in a way where this is not the right relationship for me, and I'm not the right person for him, and so here I am. Once again, so
all new chapters in life. So now there's going to be another one.
Yeah, and what's interesting is like I've gone through hard things in my life. You could read it in the book, but this 2024 came in hot with like a series of hard things. And what was different is like I didn't internalize any of it. I didn't worry about my look good. If I was worried about my look good, I would have just answered that question. Yes, I have the love of my life. We're happily ever after. And the reality is messier. And I've let like my community of friends that I've developed like support me, and like I'm like freaking out some days, and I'm okay with that. And they I give people the gift of being there for me like I am for them, and so it makes everything easier. And that's when you're like, oh, I actually have done some healing. It's only when you get tested, do you revert to old patterns, or is it the new stuff is stuck? So that's been the gift of hard things this year, is just knowing that I handle things way differently than I used to.
Right. Any updates on the book being developed for TV?
It was optioned to be a TV series by Scott Budnick and his company, One Community. And he did all the Hangover movies, and he did Just Mercy. So So yeah, it's being developed. There's a great showrunner attached to it, and it hasn't been sold to streaming yet, but that should happen fairly soon, hopefully.
Amazing. Any ideas on who you would cast?
I have no ideas yet, and
Well, is there like someone you would love to play you?
um, so it'd be a younger me. I mean, I don't know. I
Really?
don't say, but
You
yeah,
don't sit up at
someone young
night
and
saying, "I
someone
wish
young and
so and
someone
so."
younger and cuter. Yeah. No, it's going to be like a dark comedy too, because I know it sounds heavy, the book, but there is lots of humor in it, and that is kind of my joy. I like to laugh and be playful
Right.
in
Maybe like
life.
a Reese Witherspoon. She could be
Yeah,
funny
yeah,
and dark at the same time.
yeah. I think something like that would be
Yeah.
amazing.
All right, last question. As a literary agent, what do you think makes a good story?
I think what makes a good story is one that you can't put down, first of all.
Mhm.
But that's good writing. But what makes a good story is when people who have no similarities to your experience, like they have never climbed Mount Everest or done the things, but that there's enough universals. This is for a memoir, right? There's enough universals in there that they see themselves in your story,
Mm.
right? And the reason I do as an agent, I do nonfiction. I do a lot of memoir because there's no other way to be so close into someone else's consciousness and decision making. If I'm reading a book in the I voice, I am that person. So there's no other medium. There's no video where I can learn about someone or read about someone. I am them making their choices for good or bad, living their life, feeling what they feel. And I think that is the best way to hack empathy in the world.
Right.
And I think that there's a lot of ordinary people with extraordinary stories and a lot of voices to be heard. And so a good story is one that has like the universals in it where people can see themselves in you,
Yeah.
in your story. Yeah.
And so tell people what you're doing now.
So I am doing my day job as a literary agent. I have a lot of authors I'm working with, and helping a few authors launch their books this year.
And are you still ghostwriting?
I'm trying not to ghostwrite anymore. I've written 13 books as other people, and one book is myself. And so I think I try not to, except for when I can't say no. There's someone's story or something that I just feel like I can do a great job. So I say that I say no 99.99% of the time, but I leave a little wiggle room for something that I can't say no to or I feel so passionately about. All the books I do have some they're impact driven, even though they're entertaining. The books I do, I want to create a better world, and my lane is books. That's what I do. Good
Yeah.
at rearranging letters on the page. So I'm starting to write fiction again, which is what I went to graduate school. So I'm working on a novel, and I might do some film and TV writing. Like, I don't know. I feel like in many ways, even though I'm not the youngest person, I'm just getting started. And I always like to have creative goals and what can I do next? That's kind of what keeps me going every day. So
I love that. And a good underdog story is always.
I love an underdog. I do.
Yeah.
I will always want to champion the underdog like I was championed.
Yeah, I agree. All right. The Many Lives of Mama Love is out now. You guys can find that. Where can they find it? Amazon, anywhere?
Anywhere. Amazon, bookstores, Audible.
And if they want to look up more about you, just tell us where we can find you.
My Instagram at Lara Love Hardin, even though my boys hate I'm on Instagram, but I am. And then my agency is called True Literary.
Amazing. Lara, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to Misunderstood. I'm your host, Rachel Yucatel. Please be sure to subscribe to the show and give us a 5-star rating and review. You can support the show by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/misunderstood with Rachel Yucatel. Do you have ideas for the show or want to reach out? Email us at info misunderstoodpodcast@gmail.com. That's spelled MISS understood. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.